Now, in these characters of the New Testament, Paul, in some senses, is a living paradox. Just think for a minute of the various aspects that are true about him. He's a strict and pious Jew of good standing. He's a native of Tarsus in Cilicia, a freeman of the Roman Empire. He believed in the special privileges of Judaism on the one hand, and yet he becomes an apostle to the Gentiles. He was passionate, but he was something of a mystic also. All of that's true about him. But when Paul tells his story later on in the Acts of the Apostles, when we read that story of what happened to him, we get a picture of what the transformation was really all about. In Acts 22, I'm going to read verses 6 and 7, and then 10, 12, and 15. So first of all, in 22, 6 and 7. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. And then later on in verse 10 in the same chapter, what shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you'll be told all that you've been assigned to do. And then it reads on further on in verse 12, a man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. And then further on in verse 15, you will be his witness to all people of what you've seen and heard. You see, Paul was changed, but he was then given a purpose. Paul wasn't one of the original 12, but was considered an apostle in his own mind because of the unique nature of his conversion. From the comparative obscurity of Tarsus, reflects upon his life, can fill libraries the world over. He becomes a missionary. He reaches a whole world of people, and he eventually gets to Rome. Now, when he wrote the letter to the Romans, probably the most preached and read of all the epistles Paul ever had, and wrote, you know, the one that has perhaps guided communities and guided Christian thinking, he'd never been to Rome. But he anticipated one day getting there, and he did. But when he arrives there, he will be in chains. He had an amazing ability to cross boundaries, to make Christ available for many. For me, the key to all this is summed up in the words of some of his texts. At the beginning of Romans, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And then in Corinthians, he said, I've become all things to all people. See, Paul might be the source of much conjecture and even disagreement, but what is indisputable is that when this conversion happened, Christianity took on a whole new way of living, and it spread throughout not only the whole Roman Empire, but to the ends of the earth, a marvelous conversion experience. It lies at the heart of all of our lives. Sometimes it happens in a moment. Sometimes it happens over a period of time. And even when it happens in a moment, we look back and we say to ourselves, gosh, people were praying for me, people were helping me, and I can see how some of those little pieces all now fit into place. So this apostle wasn't ashamed of Christ. He never would be. And if we follow Jesus Christ, if we're engaged in the good news of the gospel, if we're involved, whether it's in our local church or beyond, we need to be a people prepared to stand up for what we believe to be right. Sometimes that's standing up for those things that we need to be about in terms of justice in our society. Sometimes it's engaging and discussing and debating the issues of the day. But in all things, it is to be true to what we believe is right in Christ. So I'm grateful of all these characters in the New Testament that we've managed to find a place for Paul. Possibly the best of all the apostles in terms of the communication skills that he had. Many of them were written skills. Many of them were building situations where he could cross the bridges. But in all things, the honor was given to Christ. For you can't tell the story of Saul, who became Paul, without talking of the God in Jesus Christ who changed him. Now, we don't all change our names. We generally keep our own names. Some change them when they get married or when they enter into relationships. But for all of us, we are changed if we belong to Christ. That change is deep, it's profound, it's transformational. It affects the way that we live, it affects the way we talk, it affects the way we see the world. All of us are affected by the world around us. But the great thing is this, that the wonderful attraction of Christ can give us a new vision and a new purpose. And if you've never found the warmth and attraction of Jesus Christ, you can open your heart and you can find him, you can know him, you can believe in him today.